Hello, this is Dr. Tai Ikomi, the author of the best-selling book, His Beauty for My Ashes, and Forgiveness Discipleship, a 12-volume collection on forgiveness. And today we continue with the series on the difficulties that stand in our way to forgiveness. Forgiveness is difficult. We all know that, but it's good to know why it is difficult. Once we could decipher the difficulties on the path to forgiveness, then we can be in search for solution to it. And so today we want to look at one that I believe is one of the most difficult reasons why we do not want to forgive, and that is we live with the consequences. In other words, we live with the consequences of the bubble that our offender left in our lives. We continue to live with what they have done, even after years of the offense. And one thing I can say is this, that in any situation that we are in, we are more than conquerors. Let that be established in your heart, that you are more than a conqueror. Romans 8:37 says, Nay, in all these things we are more than conquerors through him that loved us. All right, let's start. Now let's look at some of the difficulties in the consequences of forgiveness. There is a case of a man that I watched many years ago. The man was brought to a talk show. He was in a wheelchair, and they wanted him to have a face-to-face um, confrontation with the man who put him there. The man was drunk, and he got drunk, got behind the steering, and this man became um, paralyzed as a result of it. And so they wanted this offender, who was very remorseful, to come and apologize to him on this talk show. And the man on the wheelchair said, "How can I forgive you? You are on your feet. I am on the wheelchair. I continue to live, to go through this day in, day out. How can I forgive you?" Or the person who took your finances, which you have, taken care to build over the years, and someone just came and absconded with it, just stole it. And now at the age of 70, you now find yourself waking up at 6 o'clock in the morning to leave the house at 7 to do a job with a body that is not as strong as it was before. The list goes on. Or there are times when it's a social thing. Somebody just took your name and just decided to just spoil your reputation. How do you forgive such a person? And I remember my own story. How do I forgive the man who killed my husband and my three children? Um, till today, the consequence is still there. I still do not have biological children. I still have to live with the consequence of that. How do I forgive such a person? And so, when we look at the consequences of what the offender left behind us, we really do not feel like forgiving. Well, I just want to say this: that one thing that you can trust God for is that God can turn every situation around. God can bring something good out of it. We know, at least as at the onset, that God is more than any situation. There's nothing that God cannot do. And so just trust that God, can take something good, something bad, and bring something good out of it, because He is God. And I'm reminded of the story of Joseph. Joseph was the love child of Rachel and Jacob, and he was sold into Egypt. From all appearances, his life was over. Think of it. Imagine yourself in that situation. He was sold as a slave. From then on, he was to be a commodity. He could not sleep where he wanted to sleep. He could no longer work for wages. Everything he did was free. He could be asked to do anything, whether he liked it or not. Not only that, he would get married, and his children could be sold to the highest bidder. Think of such future, the bleakness of the future. And he thought, I mean, he might have thought that there was nothing, even though I believe that Joseph somehow knew that his dreams would come to pass. And eventually, God changed his situation around, and he became the prime minister of Egypt. He became the next most powerful person to the Pharaoh of Egypt. And you know that Egypt was the most powerful nation of that day. So that is what God can do. God can turn anything around. And this is what Joseph said when his father, when he wanted to go and bring his father. Genesis 45, verse 13. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen, and ye shall make haste, and bring down my father hither. My glory in Egypt, from grass to grace, from a nonentity to being the one who was the next king, the next person to the king. That is what God can do for you. God can turn your situation around. Why? Because He is God. Do not allow the daily burden, the daily experience of having to live with the consequences of what they did. Do not focus on that. Focus on the God who can turn your situation around. And also, let me just also share with you my own story also. After the young drunk man killed my entire family, from all appearances, it was as if nothing good can come out of it. What good could come out of it? A 32-year-old young mother became a widow in her prime at a very young age. What good could come out of it? Well, much has come out of it. For what seemed to be beyond redemption, God has done so much out of the story. Well, about 3 years after the accident, people had been telling me where I was. I was at Orobos University. I was a student. And people were telling me, you need to write a book about your incident. And even in my own mind, I reasoned, write a book about a tragedy? What could possibly come out of it? Well, I knew that I could not write the book until I felt a kind of a nudge in my spirit. And eventually, one August day, I believe it was 1988, and 89 actually, 89. And I decided I just felt in my spirit begin to write. And so I wrote the book. And I just poured out my heart. I poured out myself, about what happened, how I felt, and all the experiences. They were still fresh in my mind. Fortunately, also I was keeping a diary, of course, and I wrote everything out. And when I finished writing it, I gave it to some students and some friends to kind of critique for me, and they did, and I thank them for it. And so I was ready to publish it. And then I just told myself, why should I publish this book? Who is going to benefit from it? It's my story. Who cares? But somehow I felt that because my friends had done so much on this book, had given me their critique and their advice, what to add, what to remove, and all that. I said, okay, for their sake, I would write the book, I would release the book. And lo and behold, when the book was released, it became almost an instant bestseller. people could identify with it. And over the years, I have read so many testimonies. I have heard so many testimonies of how God has used this book to be a blessing to so many people who would not be comforted after the loss of their loved one. I remember when I was living in New York, a pastor came to me and said that when they lost their 9-year-old son, his wife would not be comforted. She was so sad, she was so depressed, she was always crying. And then someone gave her this book, and he said that was the end of it. Oh, maybe she might still cry. So it's okay to cry. There's nothing wrong with crying. But the Lord used that book as a comfort to her. And then I also remember a very close friend of mine who told me that when her brother lost their child, about 14, 15 years old, to just infection, this brother received 5 different copies from different people of the same book because they felt that that book would be a blessing. And I can go on and on and on of how this book has been a blessing to so many people, not just to people who lost their loved ones, but it's a book of inspiration. It's a book of victory, of the grace of God, how God took me through one of the most terrible tragedies, and how God enabled me to overcome the inner pain and the grace of God and all that. And so God has taken something out of it. I never thought that this would be the case, but that has been the case. And now what God has is using my story, what happened, is to be a kind of a launch pad to forgiveness. How I forgave this young man who killed my husband and my family. At first, my focus was not on forgiveness in the early days of the early days after the accident. My focus had been on healing the people who are who are bereaved and who are grieving and all that. But in 2000, in 1999, actually, a company, a film company, approached me and said that they would like to turn my book into a video, into a movie, and that the angle would be forgiveness. Well, when the movie came out, um, I told them that really I had not been talking about forgiveness, even though indeed the forgiveness had taken place, years before that time. But my focus had been on helping people to cope with the grief. And the person told me, the producer told me that, well, you better start talking about forgiveness now. And that was how my interest in forgiveness was kindled, it was born. And now I go about telling people of how I forgave this young man who killed my husband and my 3 children that I brought into the world. You see, God can turn every situation around. And I remember some years ago, I went to minister in a church, in a Methodist church actually. And one lady I heard said that he was ready to forgive her husband, who had encouraged her to commit abortion so that both of them would be able to work hard and accumulate wealth. And later on, they could start a family. Well, after the series of abortion, she couldn't conceive anymore. And so her husband left her and went to with another woman to start a family. And she said that she would never forgive him. However, after hearing my testimony, she said that she was ready to forgive. I can go on and on and on about how people, including ministers of God, who maybe were offended, and usually the ministers of God are easy targets of offense, easily offended. I mean, not easily offended, but easy to offend because people somehow feel that they are angels, that you can do anything to them, but really they are human beings, And so they are easy targets of offense. And how many, the various ministers who have decided that they would forgive. And so, in my own story, God turned my story around. And that's why, indeed, my very first book is called His Beauty for My Ashes. Out of the ashes of my pain, out of the ashes of losing three children, out of the ashes of having to live a lonesome life, as it were, came this beauty. The beauty of seeing people um, getting healed, of being comforted, the beauty of seeing people deciding to forgive simply because they saw me forgive, and they're encouraged that, or should I say, they are motivated and challenged that if I could forgive, they also would forgive. And so I do not know what it is that you are going through. I do not know the pain that someone has left in your life. I present to you the God who can turn all things around. Hallelujah. And we have so many people in the scriptures that God turned their situation around. We have Job, for example. After Job prayed for his enemies, prayed for his friends who really behaved like enemies, God turned his situation around. Job 42, verse 10 and 16 says, "And the Lord turned the captivity of Job where he prayed for his friends. Also, the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. After this lived Job 140 years, and saw his sons and his sons' sons, even 4 generations." Job 4, 42, 10, and 16. And we see also just Jacob, David, I'm sorry, David, we also see David, whose situation was also turned around in spite of what Saul made him to go through. And so, this is what I will say to you, and that is, do not focus on the consequences, because the more you focus on the consequences, the angrier you become, the helpless you may feel. You begin to develop a victim mentality. One thing that you can be sure of, is that when God, if God is for you, if God is on your side, then life will be beautiful. If God be for us, who can be against us? In the sense that, whatever they might have done cannot topple the goodness of God in our lives. So do not focus on your situation. Do not focus on the consequences. Rather, just say, Lord, according to your word, I will forgive. Because, Lord, you are in control of my life. And so you forgive and leave it, the rest of it, in the hands of God. And I also believe that you can try to look for what is good out of it. What lesson have you learned out of it? Something you must have learned. Who knows? Maybe God just wants you to learn this lesson so that a greater one will not come and you will be unprepared. For food for thought, maybe you are living with the consequences of an offense done against you. And the tendency is for you to say, I will not forgive. Remember that God is still on the throne, and that He is a God of wisdom, He's a God of power. Also, know that ever before you were born, God knew that this would take place. And so, He is not, it did not take Him by surprise. God is not only competent, God is omnicompetent. He knows how to take care of what it is that that person has done in your life. Do not focus on what the person did. Rather, focus on God. All right. Until the next class, goodbye and God bless you.